Welcome to Soul-Led Creative Women, the podcast for heart-centered creative women who are ready to reclaim their spark and live with deeper meaning, authenticity, and soul. So today I have Chris Nielsen with me. Chris is a best-selling author, former classical ballet dancer, and cultural communication specialist. Chris is also a trained past life regression practitioner whose unexpected and transformative spiritual experience became the basis for her best-selling book. In it, she shares a remarkable inner journey exploring identity, intuition, emotional healing, and the deeper forces that shape who we are. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for your invitation. It's such an honor. I have read so much about you, and I find your way and your life story and your podcast so fascinating, bonds with my own story and my own life, and implicitly with my book, so that I was so eager to do this interview together.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks, Chris. Well, let's just start with your journey. Tell us a bit about your journey and how creativity specifically has featured in your life.
Yes, so between 6 and 16 years old, so for 10 years, I practiced and I studied classical ballet in the school, which was besides of the main opera house in my native country, which is Romania in Central Europe. And then at 16 years old, I felt that it was not a long run, let's say, relationship with dance, although I adored ballet from all my heart, but I felt that it was not suitable in this life for my career, and I switched towards theater directing, and I studied for 3 years theater directing. But unfortunately, let's say that karma intervened, but this is something that I understood much later, years later, and because of the context of my teachers, the atmosphere that was in the university, the theater university, and so on. I decided to turn towards communication because I had this natural gift, natural talents since I was a child towards communication. And I desperately tried to find a link between communication, which was a gift, a natural talent, and between arts, because I always felt at home on stage, and still am very fond of performing arts, no matter if we speak about dance, music, theater, and so on. So I tried to find the link between communication and arts, and in France, I specialized myself, as you mentioned, in cultural communication, in arts marketing and public relations. And I lived in France both during my bachelor studies and during my master studies. I worked for the Cannes Film Festival in order to improve my practical skills and in order to get in touch with this international artistic market. Then I turned back towards performing arts in a very long and complex story. I started to work back in the lyrical theater, promoting opera and ballet. Then I went in the United States, and while I was in America, I had this great revelation. This is why I told you that I feel so bound to your own personal life story, because I felt that my arts marketing career up to that moment was quite rich, and people appreciated me, and everything seemed on the surface to be awesome. But I felt not fulfilled at all, and I had this very strange feeling of being in the right place, because, as I have already mentioned, I adored and I still adore performing arts, and I feel on stage being at home. But in a very strange way, I always felt that I was not in the right position in the field. And especially what bothered me a lot was the lack of creativity, because I wanted to do something creative, but I couldn't, because this was the way my professional life unfolded up to that moment. And I felt this huge emotional and professional blockage. Of course, that it was very hard because all the people around, especially my family, didn't agree me. It was quite a hard time. And I also developed some physical issues, which were not something very serious, for God's sake, but quite disturbing. I had a lot of problems with my gallbladder. I had some headaches, and had developed a lot of small problems which were very disturbing on the daily basis. And this was the trigger, as a matter of fact. My physical problems were the trigger, because in this way, I arrived to the point of try for the first time what we call alternative therapies or complementary medicine and so on. And listening to the recommendation of a good friend, I tried a Reiki and bioenergy therapist who really changed my life, both to feel better and to understand a lot of connections, which of course, I wasn't seeing for the time between my emotions, my feelings, and my energy and my physical body. And he also invited me to join some of his classes because he was also teaching. For the first time, I went out of curiosity, but then slowly, step by step, I was fascinated by everything I was discovering. It was like a whole world was opening in front of myself. And I started to find answers, and this was very important for me. And then 2 years later, I did the next step because I learned out about the Past Life Regression Academy in London. And all this experience completely changed my life, my way of approaching and understanding life here on Earth. During all these 13 years, I think, I explored about 35 past lives. And let's say some of these 5 or 6 proved to be well-known or famous past lives, either because I was someone known from a public point of view, or my life partner was someone known and I was his or her husband or wife, because we might be either man or woman in our lives. And at a particular moment, 6 years ago, I discovered this past identity, being the great classical composer Tchaikovsky. So being Pyotr Ilyich, my book comes from his name, because his name was Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. And at that moment, my life completely changed, because while going through my own therapy sessions, I felt that everything was so intense and so interesting, and there are so many revelations that I had, that I felt to some extent an almost sacred duty to pass this book on. Why? Because when you are under regression, during the healing moment, because I must tell for our audience that when you do a regression therapy, in the first part of it, you are seeing the story itself. You are navigating through the most important moments. You are exploring what happened in that lifetime, who are the main important characters, let's say, persons around you, the most important things that happened to you, the traumas, and so on. But exploring the story itself is only one part of a regression session. And I would say that it's not the most important one from my own point of view. What's even more fascinating from my own point of view is the healing part, where under the guidance of the therapist, you start to see and to understand not only what happened, but why it happened. And I think that this why is the most important thing, because you want to understand why you had to pass through this or that experience, why you had to pass through that terrible trauma, who are the persons around you, and especially what are the important connections with this current lifetime. It's fascinating what you find out about these connections between lives, about the script behind a life, the life mission, and so on. And I thought that I was receiving such great answers, which were almost all of them revelations and so great truths. And Tchaikovsky's story is very intense and a very rich one, because you implicitly, going through his life story, I would say that you touch the most important, or some of the most important topics that in all of our lives, I would say, that
Sure.
characterize all our lives. And I will give you some examples. So you touch the inner child problem, which is very much debated nowadays.
Mhm.
The fear of abandonment, the way a person creates emotional and behavior patterns, which we repeat times and times on end to the
Mhm.
moment when we become conscious about it and we start working on these behavior patterns in order to change them. The depression, the relationship with the divine, the relationship with your higher self, the problem of finding your or understanding your life mission, the problem of finding your love and your partner in life, impossible loves, karma, destiny, what we inherit from our members of the family, whether we are conscious or not about it. There were a lot of topics, and I felt this inner urge to write this book. Of course, also thinking to the persons who love and appreciate my music, Tchaikovsky's music, and who would like to discover a very personal and intimate story of his life from the soul level. But mostly because no matter if someone loves or not music, and Tchaikovsky in particular, I thought that all these topics are about any human being and any of us. So this is why I think it's more than being unique kind of autobiography. It's about a spiritual book, because I'm approaching all these topics. It might seem on the surface quite different. I think that we are much crossed by the same important questions regarding the meaning of our lives and why we are here on earth and what our life really is. So this is why I decided to publish this book, although it was not easy at all for me to uncover my personal life so much, and it was very difficult, but I thought that it might be of help for the others.
And it's all you reconnecting with your creativity as well, right? So, I mean, that's
Yes.
part of your story, isn't it? I
Yes.
saw that part of your story is about rebuilding or redefining your creative identity after feeling like you had abandoned it from the early years of ballet, I'm assuming.
So I understood very well that when I was, for example, in the United States and I felt that I was in the right professional field, but not in the right position, it was Tchaikovsky who remembered me that I was in the world where he felt at home and at ease in the performing art. This is why I studied ballet, and I also promoted ballet, and I wrote a book about promoting
Yeah.
I worked so many years, and I'm still working with artists and musicians promoting classical music. So I was always attracted by this field, but I didn't feel had that creative input that he had. And I felt this need to express myself in a completely different way than I was doing it. And this is how I arrived to writing books about this topic.
So do you think that maybe the creative start that you had to life wasn't the right fit and that's why you abandoned it, in your words? So why do you think that we do abandon creativity and then often realize later on that it's actually a big part of kind of the missing piece?
In my case, it was because each of us has the greatest fear, which defines, I think, the mankind, which is the fear of the unknown. We are always afraid of changing anything in our lives, and we would prefer to continue anything which is even dysfunctional, but we know it already. So this also applies not only to the current life, but to all our lives. So if you practice a particular art and you had a particular professional path in one lifetime, your soul will tend to continue it because it's easier, because he already knows that feeling and he feels like being at home in that particular professional field. And that was exactly what I was doing. I was attracted by the same kind of professional path and the same kind of, let's say, working atmosphere like in my previous life. But sometimes it's really good for your spirit to keep on going on the same path, and sometimes your higher self, your spirit prefers to evolve and to change a bit the things. And this is when you feel that you love something, but there is something else that you must also do. you feel some kind of inner calling. And it's not easy because for your spirit, it's easier to remain in what you already know. And so I felt that in ballet, I was at home, but I was not evolving as much as I wanted. Because for you as an artist, it's very easy to understand that ballet, especially classical ballet, which I was practicing, is something wonderful and very elegant and etheric and so on. But it's a very mimetic art. So for 100 of years on earth, ballet keeps repeating itself, classical ballet. So all the dancers learn exactly what the others did in previous stagings of the same ballet. Of course, there are choreographers who try to imagine new versions of the same ballet, but all in all, it's a mimetic art. And I felt, although at the time I was a teenager and I couldn't analyze myself as I'm doing today, but there was an intuition, there was a feeling in myself that I was not the kind of person to imitate someone all my life. And I was right, because I'm not that kind of person at all. And I think that it was better, because otherwise, if I had discovered this at 25 years old, it would have been more difficult to change direction. And so sometimes there are people who must continue on their professional artistic path. Sometimes there are people who must change that direction towards other art or completely other field. In my case, what I discovered about myself as a spirit, because nowadays I'm not perceiving my past lives as something completely different, but rather I'm perceiving my whole history. And that's how I understood that as a spirit, during these 35 past lives, I discovered only two kind of professional paths. Either I am an artist and I also tried painting, sculpture, anything that was connected with art, or I have a spiritual life. I had a lot of lives when I was a monk or a priest. I was a Buddhist in the Himalayas. I was a Catholic monk. I was an Orthodox monk. I was Muslim. I was Jew. I had so many lives connected with religion and with spirituality. And I think that to some extent, my current life intertwines art and spirituality.
Yeah,
And
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
but speaking about your own path and your podcast and your question, I think that no matter a person's life story, what's important is to speak your truth. It really doesn't matter if you are painting, dancing, or creating music, or writing books and so on. I think that it's important to live in truth and to let your inner calling express yourself. If you feel in your intuition that you want to say something in a particular field, if you feel something, let yourself go.
Yeah, that's it. How important do you see that following your intuition and following your truth as part of a healthy creative practice? Because we can still be creative without it being healthy as well. Like, how do you see that as part of a healthy creative practice?
I think that accessing your intuition, soul, your spirit, no matter how you choose to perceive this idea, is crucial. It's the most important thing, in my opinion, because everything that is in our subconscious mind is what conducts us in our life to some extent, because all our history, no matter if we speak about the period between incarnations, so the afterlife, life between lives, or the past lives, or anything that is connected with your current life from your childhood, the teens and so on, is stored there in your subconscious mind. And when you use your intuition, you access it. And I think that this is your richest treasure. All your experience, all your history, everything that you have ever felt and lived is your inner treasure. So you using it in order to express yourself as an artist is the most important thing, in my own opinion. But for this, you must let yourself free to express yourself. I was thinking this morning, interesting idea when approaching this interview that we are doing, that life on earth, unfortunately, is characterized so frequently by suffering in so many ways. There are so many sorrows which we feel each lifetime. And I think that you reach a certain point in your human evolution, and I really felt it on myself. So I'm speaking about my experience, wanting to make all the women listening to us really struggle for the same objective, that one day you really reach a point when you might transform all these sorrows into your elegance, into your way of defining your presence into the world, because to some extent that sorrow can one day turn you into a very noble spirit if you know how to elegantly surpass it and to raise beyond the stage of being a victim and integrating everything that you lived with so much elegance and dignity, that especially as a woman, this might give you an astonishing spiritual elegance. And when I read about yourself and I saw your paintings, this is exactly what I felt, that you transmuted. It's like a chemistry reaction, that you catalyze and transmuted anything on an upper vibration into art. And I think this is something very important, and these are not mere words. It's something that I really lived as a practical experience. To some extent, I felt at a particular moment in my current life that all the traumas that I had behind, in the end, enriched me. Though at the moment, of course, when I was living my traumas as Tchaikovsky, or of course that it wasn't pleasant at all to live that traumas. But nowadays, I reached the conclusion that one day you might transform all your suffering into spiritual experience and a very nice way of becoming mature and an evolved spirit.
So, on that note, then, what do you think it really means to allow your creative practice, your spiritual practice to really meet you in your current life season rather than what you think it should look like, or what everyone else wants it to look like?
I think that you must, first of all, to make peace with yourself. And if you don't struggle anymore to seem somebody, not to really be yourself, and if one day you arrive at the point of letting go all the things which are superficial in your life and which really don't represent yourself, and implicitly you connect to your own authentic voice, and then the ideas will start to come towards you. You will either feel a calling for doing a particular course on painting, on writing, creative writing, and so on. Or you will meet all of a sudden a person in your life. I really noticed that when you open within yourself, the things in the real life around yourself start to move.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there are pieces of information, a newsletter, a friend, a call, or a poster that you are seeing in the street about a course which happens around you that you have never seen before, but that really start to change slowly your life. So things are coming towards you if you are really opening yourself from within.
Beautiful. I also, when I was preparing for the interview, I saw something about that you talked about creativity being a bridge between where we are now and spiritual growth, ultimately spiritual awakening. Can you tell us a bit about how you see
Yes.
that bridge supporting us as we lean into spirituality more?
Yes, of course. So when I was Tchaikovsky, I felt a very fascinating thing, which I didn't perceive before, of course, that when he was composing, it was the process itself of composing was a mixture between what was in, let's say, his conscious mind, in his soul, and what came from the world beyond. Sometimes I felt that I was simply hearing music coming out of myself. I didn't know very well out of where it came, but I simply was perceiving, let's say, while walking into nature or while because I was an extensive traveler for the 19th century, and I walked a lot either in nature or in important cities of Europe, and I was frequently alone strolling. And while being alone and watching nature, buildings, and so on, I felt that each place and each being emanated a kind of sound. Like I would say today that anything had a specific energy or vibration. At the time, I didn't have these concepts of energy or vibration, but I felt that everything had, like you would say in your own terms, anything had a color, a nuance, a specific nuance, and everything I was perceiving emitted this nuance, and my feelings, my inner state also made me to perceive my feelings in, let's say, with their own specific sonority. Let's say sorrow would be a specific kind of sound, the state of happiness, another kind of sound.
Okay.
And so I was perceiving the whole world as being a mixture of harmonies. And so composing, I thought, was part coming of myself and part coming from the universe, from the divine, from outside myself. And this is why I always thought that it was a mixture of composing myself from my own hand and a kind of divine inspiration. I don't know if this came rather from what you would nowadays call my higher self, or from the divine itself, but what's really important is that it came from a higher consciousness beyond this terrestrial level. I felt that letting myself perceive all this and letting myself free to express through my music everything that I was perceiving made me, I don't know how to put it in words, made me to some extent a kind of spiritual gate. Felt myself a being through which this divine or spiritual energy poured. And I let all my heart express everything that I was feeling inside myself and perceiving from outside. And I know that this might sound very abstract and a bit complicated, but I understood that when we are in this process of creation, we might open our heart and our mind levels of understanding and towards other dimensions that we usually don't perceive as human beings if we don't have special natural gifts. In this way, I think that creativity may open for any of us a gate towards the spiritual world, towards a world which is higher. And I think that implicitly this brings to any artist a gate to spiritual evolution.
And yeah, so our creative evolution is linked to our spiritual evolution. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I strongly agree with that.
And so is a creative practice also a spiritual practice?
Yes, of course. And I would say that it's even a healing practice because while creating, you really let yourself express anything that you might not have expressed other ways. So I think that it's a way sometimes to unburden yourself. This is why sometimes art doesn't look beautifully from an aesthetic point of view, because we are also releasing our fears, our frustrations, and so on. But to be honest, I think a lot of artists will hate me when I will uncover this truth. I think that artists are never creating for their audiences.
No.
I think that the artistic creation comes from an inner urge of the artist to express something. And then, if there are audiences interested in perceiving and in interacting with this or that form of art, it might bring them a lot of joy or a lot of intense experience, interesting for their own evolution. But I don't think that at the starting point, let's say, of an artistic creation, you have this idea of, I want to create something for my audiences, because it won't be authentic.
But I think you can also have success with it and continue to keep making the same thing over and over again. It was originally this beautiful, divine kind of inspired thing. And then all of a sudden you're burning out creatively, or you don't like doing it anymore because it's part of that following the divine guidance that you could sort of
Yes.
explain so beautifully before. So for all the women who are curious about using their creative practice to step into a more empowered and fulfilling future, what powerful message or question would you like to leave them with today?
I think that I would like all the people who are listening to us to ask themselves what I was telling earlier. Are you really living in truth? So, are you really authentic? Because what I'm also approaching in my podcast, Time Traveling, where I debate on all the topics discussed in the book, is the fact that we are born in specific families. And even if our parents or our siblings or our grandparents and so on don't tell us, listen, you should do this or that in this particular way, when we are little, we learn a lot simply through imitation. So if we see people around us doing some things and performing some things in a particular way, or behaving and or speaking in a particular way,
Mm-hmm.
we implicitly imitating them without being conscious about it.
Sure.
And we do the same with society, because when we go to school and later when we start working and so on, we don't realize that the society tends to tell us that things should be done in this way and only
Mm-hmm.
in this way and so on. And so slowly, if you are not a very, let's say, strong character, you
Mm-hmm.
start to do and to think and to act in a lot of ways which really don't represent yourself. So I think it's very important to take some small breaks. And I'm suggesting to people to choose one day of the week and each half an hour to stop and to analyze their actions and their behavior and also the way they speak, and to ask themselves, is this really what I'm thinking, what I would like to do? It's
Mm-hmm.
something that I have seen to my mother, or it's something that I heard from my brother. And thus you will start noticing that quite frequently we really took for granted some things, and you should slowly try to decide on a conscious level what you really want to keep and what you really want to change. Because I don't want to say that anything that influenced us is not good. There are a lot of things which really help us, but there are a lot of things which really don't represent us. So you should always try to be yourself as authentic as possible. And this starts with a short inner analysis. And I think that's the most important thing for a human being and for an artist too.
So how can people get to know you better, Chris, and get a real feel for the work that you're doing?
So it's my author website, chrisnielsenbooks.com, where they can learn about my book, about my podcast, and they can also join your social media. And of course, that people might also search me on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts for my time traveling podcast, where we debate on all these topics that we discuss today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me today, Chris. Beautiful talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, and I wish you all the best. And we are looking forward to seeing your new paintings all the time. They are so nice.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Hey, Sam here. Thanks for listening to the end. If you love this episode, I would love to hear from you. Please send me a message on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Sam Horton Studio. For more episodes like this, please subscribe to my podcast, Soul-Led Creative Women, on your favourite platform. You'll find all the links at samhorton.co/podcast. The themes and tools explored in this episode feature in my new online program, Empowered Creative Soul. To find out more and join the waitlist for VIP perks when doors open, please visit samhorton.co. The direct link is in the show notes. Take care.